Continuing with our notes, let's look at rebuttal rather, and refutation. These are two devices that are used to address counterarguments. A counterargument is just any argument that opposes another argument. So if you bring up a counterargument in your essay, it would be an argument that opposes the argument you're arguing. Your argument, consequently, would be a counterargument to that argument. So it's just any argument that opposes another argument. Generally, by addressing counter arguments, you're strengthening your own argument. Because if you can not only prove why you are right, but why the opposite position is wrong, that makes for a more convincing argument. So we have two devices here, rebuttal versus refutation. And honestly, a lot of people just use these two terms interchangeably. Technically, though, they do have two different functions or two different devices. Rebuttal is raising doubts about or pointing out flaws in an opposing argument, while refutation is actually proving an opposing argument wrong. Rebuttal, in other words, is used to poke holes in a counterargument by pointing out logically fallacious reasoning, by undermining the credibility of its evidence, by raising counterexamples that go against a generalization that argument makes, or by suggesting different conclusions that can be drawn from the evidence that's given. Refutation, on the other hand, is where you actually argue that the counterargument is invalid. So these two devices often go hand in hand. Rebuttal will raise questions about the counterargument. Refutation will actually prove it invalid or wrong. Honestly, though, being able to distinguish rebuttal from refutation isn't really that important unless you do competitive debate or go on to study law. In AP Lang, try to use the right term, be as precise as possible, but the more important thing is to understand how both of them work. Rhetorically, both rebuttal and refutation can enhance logos techniques by strengthening an argument, and ethos techniques by making the writer appear more fair-minded and knowledgeable about their subject. Go ahead and pause the video at this time to complete practice activity 2.12, then resume the video as I'll discuss some of the answers. Okay, let's start with question number 1. What is the writer's primary purpose? In other words, what is the writer trying to make his audience think, feel, or do? Well, the whole purpose of this essay is to convince his audience of something, specifically to convince them that an official English-only policy would be harmful to American society. And he gives several different reasons on why it would be harmful throughout the essay. Moving on to question number 2, this entire essay is built on refutation. What idea is the writer refuting? Well, Jameson here is refuting the idea of enacting an English as an official language of the United States. That's the idea he's refuting. And this is something you can do as well in your essays. A lot of people think of an argument essay and they think right away of, well, what position am I in favor of and how can I defend that position? But here we have an example of another very common type of argument essay, one that refutes a position that the writer doesn't believe in. And so that's always a way to go whenever you're trying to figure out how to approach an argument assignment. Question number 3, what is one example of the writer referencing an outside source to explain a key concept? Well, he does this in paragraph 3 with that long quotation from Charles Krauthammer, where he says official means the language of the government and its institutions. So he is referring to Charles Krauthammer's explanation of what an official language actually would entail. Moving on to question 4, what is one example of the writer referencing an outside source to introduce an opposing argument for rebuttal or refutation? Well, he does this in the very next paragraph, paragraph 4, where he sources something that Bob Dole said about promoting English as a national language is not an act of hostility, but a welcoming act of conclusion. Well, then the author of the passage in paragraph 5 immediately refutes that with another sourced position saying that, no, it is actually an act of hostility. It is not inclusive to force people to communicate in a particular language for official business in this country. Next, number 5, what is one example of the writer referencing an outside source to support his own ideas? I kind of mentioned this previously, but in in paragraph number 5, he uses some sourced information from Miriam Marquez, who says that for those who do not subscribe to this way of thinking, implying Bob Dole's way of thinking, however, this type of legislation is anything but, quote, welcoming act of inclusion. Many of them, like Miriam Marquez, readily acknowledge the importance of English, but fear that talking in Spanish or any other language for that matter is some sort of litmus test. So that's the background, that's the supporting idea that he pulls there, that people who propose the sort of English only as an official law don't take into account that it would become a sort of litmus test used to gauge how patriotic, what kind of a quote American you are, which is one of the things that the writer warns against. So that's one of the couple of places. He does this again toward the end of the essay when he cites Professor Robert D. King. That's another place where he uses outside sources to back up his ideas. That's there in paragraph 11. Question 6 asks, what are the functions of paragraphs 4, 5, and 6 in relation to one another? Well, paragraphs 4, 5, and 6 create a sort of pattern that this writer, Jake Jamieson, uses a couple of times throughout his essay. Paragraph 4 is where he brings up a particular counter-argument that he then refutes in he rebuts and starts to refute in paragraph 5 and then further refutes in paragraph 6. Paragraph 6 provides a specific example of the refuting claim that he makes in paragraph 5. So it goes counter-argument, rebuttal and refutation, and then paragraph 6, specific example supporting the rebuttal and refutation. Looking now at question number 7, what are the functions of paragraphs 7 and 8 in relationship to one another? Well, 7 and 8 follow that same sort of counter-argument and refutation pattern. In paragraph 7, he brings up the tendency of official English proponents to put down other languages and how that's kind of it's discrimination, it's discriminatory. And then paragraph 8, he refutes that, starting with, now according to this mindset, not only is English speaking any language other than English abusive, but it's also irrational and bewildering. And then paragraph 7, it contains the counter argument. He starts off paragraph 8 by kind of summing up the counter argument so that he can refute it with the rest of paragraph 8. And finally, we come to question number 8. What are the functions of paragraphs 9, 10, and 11 in relation to one another? Again, we follow this same sort of pattern that we've had before of starting off with a counter-argument, bringing up this counter-argument in paragraph 9 about what this conservative attorney David Price has argued before, and then refuting it in paragraph 10 by saying, however, to date, a number of these English-only bills have done this. And then furthering that refutation in paragraph 11 by bringing in some actual concurrence from someone, Professor Robert King, that supports Jake Jamieson's side here. So paragraph 9 is the counter-argument. Paragraph 10 gets into the refutation with some specific data to back him up. And then paragraph 11 supports the refutation in paragraph 10. Here now are some bonus argument techniques or devices that you can use in your rhetorical analysis. We'll start with rhetorical question, which is posing a question to the audience where the answer is so strongly implied that it doesn't need actually answering. Okay. Hypophora is another common device. That's posing a question to the audience and then immediately answering that question. I think earlier in the video I pointed out paragraph 10 is just one really short rhetorical question. Actually, that's probably more like hypophora than rhetorical question, because Heidi Schlumpf asks that question and then immediately answers it in the next 2 paragraphs. Third device, procatalepsis, which is predicting potential counterarguments and then rebutting or refuting them. Procatalepsis is also sometimes called prebuttal because it's not like you're rebutting something that someone has argued, you're predicting that someone might argue against you, and so you kind of cut them off with that, with prebuttal. I like to call procatalepsis the some might say device. So you're not actually rebutting any specific criticism that anyone's had, you're anticipating that some might have this criticism or this counter argument, and then you're using that to refute it. When you write about argument techniques in your rhetorical analysis, it's important to keep a few things in mind. Unlike style devices, argument techniques are actually inherently persuasive, but they can also just be used to enhance other persuasive elements like style elements. So when you write about an argument technique, you can focus an entire rhetorical analysis paragraph on a single argument technique, or you can discuss argument techniques like you would style devices as enhancing other rhetorical techniques. For instance, you could analyze a writer's use of refutation and rebuttal throughout a text as a device, as a means of strengthening several different arguments that that writer makes. Here, you'd want to mention the techniques of refutation or rebuttal in your topic statement of the paragraph. Or, on the other hand, you could analyze a writer's attempt to create a fair-minded persona, and within that analysis, mention their use of something like concession and refutation that enhances that larger rhetorical technique of creating the persona. Here, the argument technique would not be identified in your topic statement, and you just mention it like you would a style device.